Okay, I'm going to riff on truth theories. This will be superficial because it's a huge topic. So I'm going to break it down as best I can for you. And then what I would suggest is maybe, I think Sisyphus Redeemed has a very good series of videos on the history of the philosophy of science that will help with this. Gary Edwards has some older videos that gets into the notion of deflated truth theories. So let me start with that. Deflated truth versus inflated truth. The notion of inflated truth is that truth is this essence of its own that's out there in the world. A big T truth, sometimes is what it's called, a capital T truth. That truth is this ideal or this objective that exists out there in the world. So when we're maybe trying to correspond, we're trying to achieve correspondence between our assertions in the world. We're achieving truth, and it's out there found in correspondence. So it's truth as an ideal or as an essence or as a discrete entity. Deflated truth theories sort of posit that truth is not as important as that. It's not as significant as that. It's not something that's out there that exists in reality. That we seek and find. The truth is actually contingent. It's a property. And specifically, it's a property of language, of declarative sentences. This is called truth as a semantic axiom, meaning it's the basic presupposition or the basic assumption behind a declarative sentence. That if I make a claim of correspondence, that's the statement that I make now has the ability to be tested for falsehood, that it can be falsified. And the truth is nothing more than that. It's a quality of a sentence or of an assertion. The truth is irrelevant. It doesn't become relevant until we declare something about the world. And then at that point, we seek truth through falsifying the statement. So it's an artifact of language and an artifact of thinking. It's not a quality out in the world. So they call this a deflated notion of truth because they're saying that the notion of truth isn't as significant as we've been led to believe in the past. Okay, I think that is a testable assertion that truth is an adjective. It's a quality of a certain set of speech acts or thinking acts. And for the time being, I'll just assume that thinking and speech are the same. That we don't discover truth. We assert a proposition and then through initially verifying and then secondarily falsifying and more predominantly falsifying it, can we say that the statement is true? We don't say that we've obtained some new object out there or some new quality. What we do is we verify whether that statement has the quality of truth or falsehood. It's called truth bearance. If it has the ability to be tested or not, then is it a truth-bearing statement? So that's the first notion that I'd like to get across to you, that truth is an artifact of speech. So this kind of ties into what I said elsewhere, I think, around property about Vitruvianism, that some concepts that are exclusive to humans might be better described by behavior rather than ideal discrete definitions or essences. The truth is something that we do in our speaking, and it's not all of our speaking. If I say, hey, you, or I ask you a question, those speech acts don't obtain the ability to be falsified or not. So they're not truth-bearing statements. So specifically, truth is a quality of declarative statements when I'm making a statement about the world. Okay. Next is there are a number of competing theories on truth. And if we look at it from a deflated concept of truth, then really what these different theories are really the criteria by which we test or falsify a statement, rather than obtaining truth out there in the world, identifying a truth that's out in the world. The first of which is correspondence. The correspondence theory is saying that if the statement corresponds to the state of affairs in the world, then it's true. And if it doesn't correspond to the state of affairs in the world, then it's false. Now, with the notion that our senses may not have evolved for accuracy, but for effectiveness. The notion of pneuma and phenomena, that we may not be observing the world the way it is. Our senses may have evolved to just process the information that we gather from the world in a way that's useful. So the way the world is might be completely different from the way that we see the world. In other words, evolution doesn't demand accuracy in cognition, only effectiveness, which then gives birth to this notion of pneuma and phenomena, which then gets into the next theory of truth, which is coherence theory of truth. And coherence theory is to say that something is truthful if it coheres within a network of ideas. So you might notice with these videos that I'm making right now, and I apologize, they're not terribly great. It's very difficult to talk about one concept without bringing in the other concepts. So it's hard to talk about asymmetrical benefit without getting into reciprocity, or getting into the three ways of coercing the world. And then talking about three ways of coercing the world, it's hard not to talk about reciprocity. And it's hard to talk about reciprocity without talking about property, or to talk about truth without talking about the three ways of coercing the world. It's because all of these things, they don't live or exist in a linear progression. It's not A to B to C to D. It's more like a fisherman's net, and where their knots are tied in the net, or where these things exist. It's a network of relations between these concepts, a relationship of constant relations. So coherence theory is the idea that you can be making a statement that's correspondent, but it doesn't cohere to the rest of the body of knowledge that you have. So within the context that you're speaking it may appear to be true, but it doesn't cohere to anything else. So we can make a statement that, and this is part of the founders of E Prime would get into this. I can say that the cup is sitting in front of me, but that doesn't cohere to the notion that my senses might be wrong. I might be in error. So all I can really say is I see the cup sitting in front of me, because I don't really know it's there, because it doesn't cohere with the notion that my senses are flawed. So coherence is really prioritizes internal consistency in statements. So this is your logic in epistemology, that they're logically sound, where correspondence is, that they're logically valid. And correspondence focuses more on whether they're sound. Does the evidence back up the statement? And coherence says, is the construction of the assertion logically valid? Because you can have the evidence in place, but have it arranged in an incorrect manner and come to a false conclusion. So all your evidence can be correct, but if your logic is inconsistent or contradictory specifically, then you're still wrong. So really, correspondence theory and coherence theory are prioritizing some elements over others. Correspondence theory rests specifically on internal consistency. And you'll see this with a lot of Platonists and idealists, that if you can organize a logically consistent set of concepts that you can superimpose over what you observe in the world, sometimes what we call in Propertarianism an interpretive frame, then it is true. But without it being grounded into some correspondent explanation, it becomes problematic. You start to get these almost nearly mystical ideas. And then it becomes that these concepts, even though they're internally consistent, could just be a matter of word games. So then we fall into a problem there. I'm going to add one third truth theory in here, which is a religious truth. Because semantic axioms are artifacts of truth, or of speech acts, we can't really ignore religious truth. It's in there. We can't just dismiss it saying it's not coherent and it's not correspondent. It's still a speech act, and there are still measurable sides to it. Religious truth is to say that somebody has had an experience that is profound. It is highly centered on the individual. So there's this centrality to it, meaning it's only about me. And that it's personal, meaning whatever this higher thing that your experience is directed specifically at you. It's a personal way. So there's certain qualities to a religious experience that they use to qualify whether it's true or not. So I add that in there because it exists purely in the realm of experience, where correspondence is purely in the realm of objects, and coherence is in how those two are stitched together. Okay, here's the thing. I've said this a number of times around spectrums. That things exist not as discrete entities in the world, but within a spectrum of possible operations, constant relations of different operations, where there is a limit to where they begin and end. Really what we're describing when we're talking about these three truth theories is we're talking about where three different points on a spectrum. And when we focus in on only one point, it then appears that it's contradictory or dichotomous to the other point, when really they're not. They are specific to certain domains in which we reference when we make declarative sentences. So all three of them exist as truth candidates, and one doesn't weigh more so over the others because they're domain specific. So for instance, if I make a declarative statement about the world, then that is a correspondent claim. Then we refer back to the world to verify if that's true. If I make a statement about my experience, that's no longer something that coheres to the world. It's just purely meaningful. It's not factual. So you say that correspondence corresponds, funny enough, or correlates to fact. If you're making a correspondent claim, you're making a factual claim. So then we verify the facts. When somebody's talking about the truth of an experience, they're talking about meaningfulness, that it was meaningful to them. And then when we talk about coherence, we're talking about value. Okay. So there's a transgression, a movement of how data moves into a fact that moves into a value. And that transition relates to meaningfulness. So we can't ignore meaningfully true. So if I make a statement like, it's raining outside and I'm sad, I am making two declarative statements. I'm making a correspondence statement that outside it's raining, which can be verified by going to the window and looking to see if there's rain falling in the sky. I'm also making an experiential claim that I'm sad. And if truth then is the ability of a sentence to be tested, how do we test the second part of that sentence? I am sad, right? And if existence is to have effects on the rest of existence, then that sadness should be observable. So the statement of meaningfulness, I am sad, is falsified by my behavior. Am I behaving sad? Which then becomes important, because claims to say, God, I've touched the face of God, I am profoundly changed, the old me has died and I am reborn. somebody makes that claim and their behavior doesn't change, then we can claim that they're lying. They're claiming something to be so profound that it's altered their behavior or altered them. But if we see no noticeable change in their behavior, then we can falsify the statement that they've had that experience. Whereas other people will make that claim and their behavior does change, which then means that that belief in God, the belief in that experience, has altered their behavior in a measurable way. So the claim that, say, for instance, God doesn't exist because we can't find it in the world is to say that God isn't correspondent, it isn't factual. So we're trying to measure it in one domain of a true sentence. Then we can say, on the other hand, people have this experience of God that alters their behavior, and their behavior, or the combined behavior of believers, has a measurable effect in the world. Then we can say that that God does exist, and that we know it exists by the measurable effects of the believers. So it exists as a belief that alters behavior that is measurable in the world. So it exists. It exists as a behavior modifying belief. Let's talk about the transition of data and why coherence and falsification took prominence in science. And for instance, leftist claims that, say, some scientific studies are nothing more than indication of the bias of the researchers, an implicit bias of the researchers. There's two components to this. One is that when we say that something's factual, say we have a pool of data, and you could say that every information point in the world is just a datum. When we say that something's factual, it's to take a certain portion of data, certain data points, and say that they're relevant. Well, what are they relevant to? Well, whatever the fact is proving. You say that this is a factual claim about this specific thing. The data becomes a fact in relation to the assertion. So data doesn't become fact until we make a search or a query about the world. Is the sky blue? Fact of the matter is the sky is blue. Well, it's only a fact because I searched. I searched for that. I made the assertion that the sky is blue. So the criticism of science is to some of these notions of scientism is to say that all scientific facts are really a matter of cherry picking because they're relevant to whatever hypothesis they're testing. And then the hypothesis dictates which data points are actually factual or not. The hypothesis makes certain data points relevant and others not. And the ones that are relevant are facts. The ones that are irrelevant are just that. They're irrelevant. They're not even considered. So whoever creates the hypothesis then, and then goes out to seek it through correspondence, is then only just confirming their bias, whatever motivated them to ask that question. And then they interpret data in a particular way to support the fact. Now that's pretty much nonsense. But it's important to highlight how data becomes fact. It becomes relevant to a certain aim that we have. Okay, so once we have now a pool of facts, some facts we will weigh heavier than others. So the first test is the data relevant? And then the second one is, what is the relative value of the fact? Is it valuable in terms, first off, is the data valuable in terms of this hypothesis? Yes. Okay, so it's a fact. And then from within there, the facts that support or falsify the hypothesis have a different valuation. They're evaluated differently. So it's evaluated against the question itself. Some take preference, some don't. So data is now moved from fact into value. And then this is a real sticking point in science, is the fact-value distinction. I think the issue is that they're ignoring datum. It's datum, fact, value. And that really what we're saying when we're assessing something as a fact or a value, is we're saying, is it meaningful? Well, is it meaningful related to what? What is guiding the valuation? Well, at the end of the day, it's the assertion that we're making about the world. So we make this declaration around the world. It could be worded as a question or as a hypothesis, and then we go to seek through correspondence where it relates or not. And then when we collect that data, we then reevaluate or evaluate the weighting of that data relative to the hypothesis, which is about coherence. Does this data now cohere to my hypothesis, and does it cohere to anything else within known knowledge relevant to that hypothesis? And then we decide whether it's true or not. All we're doing is verifying or falsifying the statement. Is it true? So these are means of testing the survivability of ideas. And then we say that those ideas that survive are true, and then we treat them as though they're knowledge. Okay. So here's a thought experiment for you. I go to the gas station. I've got a $50 bill. I fill up my truck. It only takes $45. I get $5 in change. As I'm walking back out to my truck, I'm putting my wallet in my pocket. The $5 bill falls out of my pocket onto the ground. I don't notice it. I drive home. I put my wallet on the counter. I sit down in front of Kurt's Facebook wall. My daughter comes by and says, I need $5 to go to the store. Or no, sorry. My daughter comes by, she owes me $5. She sees my wallet, puts the $5 in my wallet, and proceeds on. Then my wife comes home and says, I need $5 for tip on dinner. I say, there's $5 in my wallet. It's on the counter. She goes over to the wallet, pulls the $5 out, and pays the tip. To me, the $5 that my wife took out was the same $5 that I got at the gas station, because I have imperfect information. So this is the notion that I have adequately justified my belief that it's the same $5. There's no reason in my justification to say that that $5 doesn't exist. It's to say that I got $5 at the gas station, I put it in my wallet. When my wife grabbed the wallet, there was $5 there. Therefore, there's a continuity of being of that $5 from the gas station to where I am. What this threatens is Plato's notion of what knowledge is. And they use the term that knowledge is justified true belief. So one, we have enough justification to believe that something is true and that it is true. And there's a problem with that definition. And the problem is this. It's the circular nature between justified and truth. How do we know it's true or not? Well, it's on the weight of our justification. So my justification is that the $5 was there when my wife grabbed my wallet. I'm justified in believing that that $5 was there because I put it there, and then when she grabbed the wallet, there was $5 there. Therefore, I'm justified in believing that my knowledge was true, even though it's not true. So this is a real problem around the notion, this ideal notion of knowledge being coupled with certainty. We believe that knowledge is something separate from belief. I can believe there was $5 in my wallet. I thought I knew it, but I didn't really know it. I only had a false belief. And we draw this line, this demarcation between knowledge and belief. And that somebody believes in nonsense, you say, well, that's just your belief. That's just your opinion, but that's not true. I know it's true. And this is this notion that the information that we have in our head and constructed in our head that we call knowledge gives us a certain certainty, that it obtains certainty. And that belief is something that doesn't have certainty, and knowledge is now a separate category from belief. There's a category of knowledge and there's a category of belief. Well, in our story, we can have perfect justification to justify something being true, and that knowledge is a true and justified belief. But there's something hidden in there. Knowledge is still a belief. That's the crux of it. It's not a separate category from belief. Knowledge is a type of belief. Okay, so if that's the case, what's the difference between my belief in unicorns and my belief in something that I would say is knowledgeable? My belief that the sun will rise tomorrow. How is one knowledge and how is one not? Well, Plato would say it's the justification. But then he throws in there that truth, that truthiness thing, that inflated truth idea. So I want to update that thought for you and say that what knowledge is a warranted true belief, but it's a deflated concept of truth with a robust means of warrant. So warranting is a subset of justification, right? I'm using warrant to justify the belief, but it's not just any arbitrary justification, like God said so would be a justification, or because I saw it. You say that there's got to be some sort of strict criteria to meet, i.e. warrant, before it's justified. And that truth pertains to our assertion, not the reality of the world, but our assertion about the world, and that it always remains a belief. So the first thing I think that everybody should do is decouple the notion of certainty with knowledge. That knowledge is not certain. It's provisional, and that means that it's subject to being updated. Our knowledge today can reach its limits, and then we find out that there's an area where it's wrong, and then we can update it. Okay, so that just means that knowledge is provisional. It's subject to being updated in the face of new data. So for instance, my daughter comes back home and says, I put the $5 I owed you in my wallet, and then I'm like, what the hell? Where is it then? I should have had 10 bucks. Now I have nothing. Gave $5 to the delivery driver, and now I have nothing. So what happened to the $5? And then at that moment, my belief in the existence of that $5, or at least in the persistence of being of that $5, is now broken. Now I realize that something isn't quite right in my thinking. I update that belief. I have new data. Okay, so that knowledge operates that same way. Okay. So really, what is the difference between knowledge and belief then? Knowledge is a belief that we have enough warrant for to suspend doubt. So we're mistaking the suspension of doubt with certainty. I don't doubt it, I'm certain of it. And they're not the same thing. So we warrant our beliefs to the degree that we are confident enough to suspend doubt enough that we'll act on it, right? And if our warrant is strong enough, then the outcomes of our actions will be predictable based on that knowledge. So we're really looking at the relationship of predictability and about suspension of doubt, rather than certainty and a dichotomy between knowledge and belief. So if we tie all those things together, if we get rid of the notion that the big T truths, that truth is an entity out there in the world that we seek and find, but rather it's a property of assertions that we make, that we need to test whether, and that property is that it's a property of being tested. That if we have a strong enough criteria to test that assertion, we can warrant it to the degree that we can suspend doubt enough to act with confidence. And in doing that, we find a continuum of truth theories that is not the false trichotomy, that correspondence is the means in which we warrant beliefs within the factual realm. coherence within the realm of value, and experience in the realm of personal belief. And that these three exist on a continuum, on a spectrum. And that what really coherence is doing is bridging the gap between meaningfully true and factually true. So one way of thinking of coherence is this question: given these facts, is this meaningful? What is meaningful about these facts? And logical consistency allows us to find coherence between the meaningful and the factual. If there isn't enough fact behind it, we can draw on coherence theory, internal consistency, to verify or to use as warrant for a belief that has no basis in the factual realm. Or we can lean on a realm of facts that we've interpreted in a specific way that is logically inconsistent, and then lean on the evidence to say it's true because of all the evidence. It's not the case. We need to warrant our beliefs according to the domain that they're in and across all 3 points of that spectrum. Okay. Warranted true belief, in that the warrant grants me the confidence to suspend doubt enough to act. This is what knowledge is. Thank you.